Hey, it's Jeff Zito. Thanks again for checking out the Celebrity Jobber podcast, one of the top music podcasts on the Apple Podcast music chart. Please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating. Leave a review. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow on IG, celebrity_jobber_podcast, or youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. I've known my friend Kelly Shaefer from the bands Atheist and Neurotica for over 30 years now, but I don't know much about his life before music. When I met him, his band Neurotica had a hit back in 1996 or 1997 with a song called Easy Speak. But he had a life before Neurotica in a death metal band called Atheist, which was pretty big in the Tampa Bay scene with other bands like Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse. Atheist was kind of a big deal, and now fast forward to 2025, they're back, which is a pretty incredible story in its own. We'll talk to Kelly about his big break, his influences, his first job, and pretty much all of his other jobs outside of music. And maybe we could try to figure out what would Kelly have become if not for music. I'm kind of excited for this episode myself. The very first rock star I ever met, and proud to call him my good friend. Kelly Shaefer from Atheist and Neurotica is my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
You're from Ohio originally, right? Are you from Ohio?
Yeah, I was born in Cincinnati. I came here when I was 9. Started a band when I was 16, which was Atheist, and then we got signed when I was 19.
Wow.
And so Atheist went on until 1993, and then in 95 is when Neurotica kind of got together.
Gotcha.
That went until 2002, and then Atheist came back in 2003, and here we are.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty cool timeline and a very succinct one. So you're from Cincinnati, born and raised in Cincinnati.
No, I was only there until I was 9 years old.
Okay.
And then I moved to Florida. Yeah.
So born in Cincinnati, you moved where? Sarasota, Bradenton?
Yeah, both. I went back and forth between Sarasota and Bradenton. Spent a lot of time in Bradenton in the early part of our putting the band together. We practiced in Bradenton, so
right.
We spent a lot of time down there. So, but then, in the Neurotica years, were in Sarasota.
What brought you and your family from Cincinnati to Florida?
My mom and dad split up, and they did not get along, and he was just tired of his. Can I say shit?
Yeah, it's the internet, brother. Yeah, man.
I can say shit.
You can say it, anything.
Yeah, she was just, tired of his shit, and she moved me and my sister down here, and she just went to great lengths to, and I always tell her it's the greatest thing she's ever done, because my life would have been completely different if I had been raised, or, if I'd gone through my teenage years in Cincinnati compared to, the beach of Florida. It was just an incredible way to grow up, and I value that so much. And
do you have a relationship with Dad today?
Dad is no longer with us.
Okay, sorry about that.
He's probably 5-6 years ago he had a stroke, and our relationship was tough. One of the things that I always tell people if this comes up is that I learned so much from him, but I learned exactly what kind of man not to be.
Okay.
And, not to disrespect my father, but I mean, you got to call it what it is. He did not take care. My mother took care of me and my sister, and my dad kind of took credit for it. And he was in another state, and very self-centered guy, very, the kind of guy that was just like, you can't play guitar. Everybody plays guitar. What makes you think you're going to stick out amongst guitar players? And he was always that dude. And he would be like, you need to go and learn how to fix air conditioners or fix cars, or that was his world. He was into powerlifting, and he was into, you'll find a funny story here as I come up, because I know you spent some time in Cincinnati, didn't you? Or
I actually spent a little time in Cincinnati because my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, was drafted by the Reds in the first round in the 1985 MLB draft. So he played for Pete Rose when he was a player manager. So I spent a little time in Cincinnati as a kid with my sister, who's 12 years older than me, following, my brother-in-law in his baseball career early on, which was, kind of a huge thing to me. So that's how I'm familiar with
I know what the
Cincinnati.
connection is, though. The connection with Cincinnati that I'm thinking of is our dear friend who's no longer with us, Bobby Garrett.
Yes.
Who is a DJ up there at WEBN in Cincinnati, which was my childhood. That was the station my father used to listen to all the time.
Oh, wow.
So the cool part of this story is that me and my father, he barely was in my life, just popping in every now and then just to tell me, how I'm messing up my life by not learning a trade. And then flash forward to 1998, and he has a gym and he has young people working out, and one of them is working out to the Neurotica album.
Oh, wow.
And one of them looks on, like, I hadn't talked to him in 10 years, and one of them looks on and realizes that our names are spelled exactly the same, because I have a strange spelling, Shaefer.
Right.
Shaefer is weird. And so they pointed it out to him, and he saw my face, and he was like, holy shit. And then he reached out to me, and then we reconnected for about 2 years. And it was really cool. And he was, of course, very excited to come to our show in Cincinnati. We played with George Lynch there, and brought all of his friends there. And I was a fucking, I was a hero all of a sudden, fuck the air conditioning, right, Dad? So,
wow.
So
did you feel at that moment, though, even though there was, a little bit of friction between, and it's not uncommon to have friction with parents, a lot of dysfunctional families out there, it's nothing strange about it. But at that particular moment, did you feel something like, I made him proud, I did it?
100%. Yeah, no question. Listen, I have a lot of my dad in me, but I guess it's not fair for me to say that, that he taught me everything not to be, but, I picked up a lot of things. Like, he was always a guy that liked to smell good. And it's weird, the things you pick up from your dad. Like, every time I got in his truck, he fucking smelled great all the time. And so I was like, I want that quality.
You do.
When people
you
think
have
of
it.
me, I want, and I want to make sure that I smell good, because I think smells are one of these really important senses that we have that you just kind of take for granted. So anyway, I take that from him, and I was, a very similar sense of humor as him, and but we just, that was a great moment. That was a great 2-year period, because they were playing an Easy Speak, the song that we had with Neurotica, on 29 times a week, which in rock radio is some good spins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that was in my hometown, and so my aunts and cousins all came to that show at I forget what the name of that club is in Cincinnati, but
is it Bogarts?
Bogarts.
Yeah.
Yes. And my father used to be a bouncer there. So all that shit was just in place. And so it was a kind of crowning moment in the grand scheme of the fucked up relationship, but so that was that. And then I, went on to, to grow older and have kids. And one of the problems that I just had with him is he was just never involved in my kids' lives. And that's just a deal breaker for me, man. You know what I mean? So yeah, but that was my dad experience. But my mom is always, I still talk to my mom for, at least an hour every day. And
tell me a little bit about Mom. Tell me what did she do for work, and obviously supporting you and your sister. She was a single mom. Yeah. What did she do?
So so in Ohio, she worked at a business form printing place, and she was like a top, person there. She was making $13 an hour in the 70s, which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And, she was doing really well. And that was one of the things my father had an issue with her about, and then why they fought. So when they separated, she was doing well, but he was constantly coming by the house, and she was trying to get on with her life. And so she gave up that amazing job. She had been there for 13 years and had senior, status, and said, fuck it, we're going to Florida. And she gathered us up, and we came down here, and we suffered. I mean, she worked as a waitress. She worked at Tropicana, I think, for a short time. And, she did just whatever she could to take care of us, which obviously at this point in my life, and, this age of my life, I understand just how much he did to keep us away from that violence, because he was just an abusive guy. So I have so much respect for my mom, because I know how it is. I have 2 kids, and
it's like you can look at it these days, we get older and wiser, and we, tend to get maybe a little bit more sensitive, and we can look back at those days and those times and realize how big of a hero Mom was and how influential she was, in your life,
My dad turned me on to music first, He was a big Janis Joplin guy, Jimi Hendrix and all that shit. So even before I even thought about playing music, he had kind of like woven that into my soul, which was cool. We used to go on these long rides in his car, and he would play like really cool old jazz shit. And so I think that's where the jazz influence and what I love, with Atheist and combining that with metal. So he's played a role in my life, you know what I mean? And that's kind of cool. As I have an 8-year-old little boy now, and I just think, all the time, I wonder what he's going to remember from our, the times that we spend, because
this kid, by the way, is a lady killer. I don't know if anybody has seen Kelly's son, but
he's a beaut.
I'll tell you what, he's got the hair that I know women want to put their hands in. And when women want to put their hands in your hair, there's only one thing you do as a guy: you let them do it.
Yeah, let him do it.
Oh man! So
yeah, he's a stunner.
Let me ask one final question about Dad. Was he musical? Was he in bands? And what did he do for work? You said he owned a gym or something.
Yeah, he was a powerlifting coach. So he was all muscles, and he was a great mechanic. So he used to build like the 67, 68 Camaros, and so he was a really good mechanic, which I always respected. And but I think he wanted me to be a mechanic. He wanted me to be like that. And so when I started playing guitar, he was like, fuck, no, don't play guitar. Everybody plays guitar. You're never going to make an impression. That just stayed with me. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, like, somebody told me I couldn't do it. And,
right.
No, but it really was something that stayed in my head. Like, if everybody thought like that, then nobody would ever make music. That's what I thought, even at a young age. Like, what do you mean? Just because 1,000 people do it doesn't mean that I can't be the one that sticks out. And I don't need to be at the top of the heap to be to have a joyful life and career. So,
no, I hear you.
He later on, like when that period happened, when we were all over the radio and he was proud of me, he was definitely really proud of me. And he didn't want to admit that, hey, maybe
I was wrong.
He was the guy that was always like, he never traveled in his whole life. I used to tell him, he would be like, you're like a gypsy. And I was like, yeah, but you don't understand my lifestyle. He just lived way out in the country, went to the grocery store one time a week. He would say things like, I'd be like, when am I going to see you? And he'd be like, well, I'm putting $7.50 away each week. So it's going to take like till early next year. And then I'll be able to come down and get, like, it was always like that. And as I'm older now, I look back at it and I think, well, you just didn't want to. You know what I mean? He had money and he had the ability to go do that. He just didn't want to be bothered with, changing his life. And I went up and lived with him after my mom and dad split up for one summer. And he wouldn't even let me stay at his house. I stayed at his girlfriend's house, and she had 2 kids, and it was just super fucking weird. And so I got the message loud and clear from that point. I stayed with my mom, but the music thing, he never played. So no, the musical ability in my family comes from his mother, my grandma. She's no longer with us either, but she was this woman who used to paint these amazing Christmas cards and birds and trees, and she would paint in oil, and she played keyboards, and she sang, and she was like this jolly old Italian woman, so I just have great memories of her. So
sometimes people, their mother and father, they're professionals or lawyers, real estate agents, and people are just, they become, fascinated with the arts. They do it on their own. But yeah, yours seems, your grandmother,
that's skipped a generation. Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, no doubt, because my mom doesn't even really, it's odd. She's so kind of not anti-music, but she just really doesn't listen to music in the last 40 years. I mean, she'll listen to my music or whatever. She'll hear things, but she's not a musical person, somebody that seeks out music. So my dad was at least that, but yeah, neither one of them played not a stitch of music. So yeah.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
What was the song? What was that moment where you were like, this is what I got to do?
I have a very specific story for that.
That's why we're talking right now, because I knew that you would have specific stories for this stuff.
Those are highlight moments in your life when you realize, oh shit, this is. So I was drawing, and I got into a performing arts school here in Sarasota called the Visual Performing Arts of Booker High School, and you had to audition to get into the school. We would paint out on the grass, like for our class. It was just really artsy and super cool. But there was this long-haired guy who would sit on a stool while we were painting and play acoustic guitar. And nobody stared at my painting, man. Nobody gave a shit what I drew or what was going on with the art. They were all gathered around him while he was playing all these cool Zeppelin songs. And I was like, fuck. that's what I need to do. Nobody ever gets excited when I do a drawing. You know, there's never a moment that 3 girls surround me when I'm drawing something. So I played guitar for all the wrong reasons. You know, I mean, I admit it now that I bought into the, hey, if I could just, you know, if I could play Sweet Madam Blue from Styx, then I definitely get some chicks, you know.
Well, who was this? I mean, do you even know who this guy is?
His name is Taylor. His name is Taylor. Well, it's spelled Koch, so Coke or Coach or Taylor Coach, Koch. Wherever you are out there, Taylor. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
Was he just a guy that you would see out there all the time at Booker? He was just hanging out?
He was dating a girl named Jennifer Hawley. I can't believe I remember their names. Hawley, and I'm sure she's alive out there somewhere too. And she was beautiful, and she was like, you know, and me and my art friends were kind of nerdy. You know, we weren't the stellar top of the crop, and so she was just stunningly beautiful. And then that was his girlfriend, and so that's why he would sit out there while we were all drawing, because she was drawing too. But then all these other girls would just sit around and listen. And it was just, you know, I can picture it. It's still in my head, you know, and I thought, and then my sister's boyfriend at the time drove a 1970 Javelin. It was all jacked up, and he was like a cool guy with the big curly hair, and he played acoustic guitar, and he used to play like Triumph songs, and he would play, you know, all these really cool songs. And so that really kind of cemented it for me.
Right.
So I was like, you are going to teach me how to play guitar.
You started playing guitar at 14. So by the time you form Atheist at 16 years old, what's the kind of music that you guys are listening to? Because Atheist to this day is so well respected as being this jazz fusion metal, you know, death metal, for lack of a better term. But I mean, it's so technical and so difficult to play and so very well respected.
Rush. I think we all know the Rush.
There you go.
Yeah, Rush was very early in my life. When my mom and dad split up, she kind of went haywire a little bit, and she made a lot of really colorful friends. And so she had a nice house with a pool and everything in the 70s. Like I said, she was doing really well money-wise. And so her friends would just come over and stay at our house for like days at a time. Hippies, you know, like I was smoking weed and listening to great music. And so I got turned on to Sabbath and Deep Purple and shit like that. And I was really I was way beyond my years and even as a 10 and 11-year-old. So I kind of grabbed it all from there. And then, you know, just at 14, but Rush and Maiden, Iron Maiden, huge, important part of our upbringing. And then those are the early days of Metallica. A lot of people that listen to Metallica now just see them as these old guys, but in the early days, Metallica were just so fucking secret. It was like this secret that not a lot of people knew about.
Right.
And I often said I was more excited to see them in a magazine the first time than I was to see my own band in a magazine the first time, because they were just our best kept secret. And we had like a handful of bands that nobody knew about unless you were tape trading. And so they did everything faster, and it was progressive, but it was fast, and the lyrics were interesting. You know, Iron Maiden stuff, I learned probably more about American history and British history from Iron Maiden songs than I ever did in school. You know, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner never would have come into my mind if not for it being an Iron Maiden song, which makes you go and say, well, what is the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner? And you go and look it up and you read about it.
Right.
So that was there was a lot of education through lyrics and Rush. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You know,
Neil Peart, just unbelievable lyricist, right? I'm hearing part of the story that you're telling me about earlier, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, because there might be, because I've known you for 30 plus years now, and I've been through a lot of different stages of your career, and you have a very, very successful career. You should be very proud of it. I can't wait to have you tell me more about Atheist a little bit later on.
Who was the first guy to play Neurotica on the radio?
I would like to take
you and Bob.
I would like to take half credit. Yeah, I think somebody else. I think Bob.
You and Bobby G.
I don't think I was. I was
both of you.
Well, I was like the producer. I wasn't really. I didn't really count. My voice didn't really count at that time. It became over time. It became a little louder. But yeah, I remember being at WYNF in the early to mid 90s, and you were the first rock star, quote unquote, that I met. I was very impressed with you at 20 years old.
Thanks.
Because
and then you popped back into my life during Velvet Revolver. You interviewed Duff McKagan.
That's a great story.
You're very important in my life. Life story.
Well, I wanted to tell you there's a couple things about that part of the story that I want to tell you a little later on. But when when Neurotica first started out, this was a band, local band in Sarasota. I'm a 20-year-old kid, just kind of exposed to radio for the first time. And what happens is that Kelly's band Neurotica starts hitting it a little bit. Brian Johnson from AC/DC gets involved. They record an album in Sarasota, and then they get on the radio, and they get on the radio in a lot of different places throughout the country. They had a minor hit with the song Easy Speak. But when you were telling me the story about when you played Bogarts in Cincinnati, when all this is happening, did you feel like that particular moment in time was maybe your big break?
100%. Yep. I thought after, because, mind you, this was after 6 or 7 years of underground metal. And so when Neurotica came along and we achieved that kind of success on, there was 85 stations in the country playing that song, as well as I do, being in radio. That's huge.
It is.
And we didn't have any of the payola happening. We didn't have a big label. As a matter of fact, the record wasn't even done. And so Brian Johnson had to fly to Vancouver with Mike Frazier, the guy that did all the Load and Reload Metallica records, and pay. Brian Johnson from AC/DC really just he set us up in a way that was just incredible. And they had to go and hurry up and mix that record, and it was at Bryan Adams' studio in Vancouver. And so he pulled a lot of strings and got it done because we wanted to get the record out to capitalize on the fact that song was out. But yeah, I definitely, while all that was going on, that was way different than anything I had experienced with Atheist.
Let's talk about a couple of other big monumental parts in your life. First, let's go to Ozfest. Was that a big groundbreaking experience from you being on tour with Sabbath or Ozzy, and that, how did that all come about?
Yeah, that was just so in the beginning when Brian was involved with us and we did that first record and that song was on all those radio stations, what happened was the record was not able to come out in time to capitalize on all that radio play. So we ended up not being able to take advantage of that. So we went in and made our second record, and we showcased in New York and LA and a bunch of different places. Well, we finally showcased at the Viper Room, the legendary Viper Room. And little did we know there was a guy there named Benji Gordon who was he was at the top of this new label called SmackDown Records that was being financed by the WWE. And so he saw us, and anyway, long story short, they came down and we played a show at the State Theater, and we packed that fucking place, and he was like, yes, we're signing, Neurotica. And so we signed we were the first band signed to Vince McMahon's label. And anybody that follows wrestling or knows Vince McMahon, I mean, he's just
the genius,
top notch,
genius marketer, absolutely the best in the biz.
I mean, because the cool thing about the deal was that they were in a position to not need MTV, to not need radio. They were in a unique marketing position to take a rock band like us and use our music on all their 10 hours of television. At that time, they had a show called Tough Enough on MTV where they were up-and-coming wrestlers were trying to, make the grade and be a professional wrestler, and they needed music in that all the time. And at the same time, MTV had a show called Making the Video, and so they would play our music in the background of like Kid Rock and I think NSYNC. We had some of our music played in the background of that. So those kinds of things in the late 90s, early 2000s were big. These days, obviously, TikTok and everything is so much different. But so all that was happening, and I went to, and this is a great story because it's a story of, you got to stand up for yourself at some point. I'd already been through the Atheist trials, and then now we're through Neurotica, and I went through the whole Brian Johnson thing where it seemed like it was going to hit. Oh my God, we're all over the radio. All of a sudden, boom, sorry. The KTEL was our label. Everybody's heard of KTEL for years. Like, they went bankrupt right when our record was coming out, that first one. So everything was just shit the bed. So the second record and this WWE and all this, and they had the restaurant in Times Square at that time too. So we got to play there, and they put our name up on in Times Square, as we were driving up in a limo, and it was like, holy shit, So at that point, you can imagine it's just so much different than underground, extreme death metal. So
no doubt.
I was like, all right, here we go, and so then they took us to an agency called Evolution Talent. and they had artists such as Britney Spears and NSYNC. I mean, it was a huge fucking. So they sit down and they're like, "So, congratulations on getting signed and everything." And the guy that makes the theme music for the WWE, this is a big company, and he didn't realize. And him and Vince have been friends for 17 years. So, we're just gonna have you. We're not gonna put the record out right now. We're gonna have you guys come up and make some theme music with him. And I was like, "What?" And I wrote a nasty letter to Vince McMahon, basically saying. I did in this true story. I said, listen, you would never ask some taekwondo or some judo artist to come and train a professional boxer. I said, why are you asking me to come up and make jingles with a guy that I already met the guy, and the guy was a total nerd. He was in a sweet spot. He had a $3 million studio, and he was bringing in bands like Cypress Hill and all these big hip hop bands and making them make wrestling themes, and he was collecting 50% of the publishing. And Vince McMahon had no idea about it. This dude was raking it in from huge artists, way bigger than us. And so he tried to do that with us. And so when I wrote that letter, Vince was intrigued by it because I said, look, man, you're a self-made man. You came from nothing. You know, people told you how things needed to be, and you fucking did it the way you wanted to do it. And look at you. And so he was so intrigued that he flew us up to Connecticut, to their compound and into this boardroom, just like in the movies, with this big, huge, glossy table.
Wow.
And so me and Sean Bowen were sitting there, and Doug Kay, and in walks Vince, Linda, Stephanie, Shane, the whole gang.
Wow.
And that guy, that theme music guy. So Vince walks right in, he looks right at me, and he goes, ugh, what a fucking motley crew. And he sits down in a chair, just like you would expect him to do. And I proceeded to tell him right in front of his friend of 17 years face. I was like, this guy's never been in a band. He's never been on stage. You bought and paid for a rock and roll band, my friend, and that's what we are. And so underneath the table, Doug Kay is like kind of hitting my foot.
Right, shut up.
But I was like, fuck
right,
this,
yeah.
man. I know what kind of guy that is. I felt like I knew I wasn't going to go in there and cower. I was going to go in and tell him because I had nothing to lose, man.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, man, he sat back in his chair and changed the game and said, all right, we're putting this fucking record out.
Wow.
And then, so, I mean, he really, all in that meeting, just by me being bold and kind of putting things in perspective to him, let's fucking rock and roll, man. Let's not make jingles.
Wow.
You know,
I didn't know this story. I've known you for 30-something years, and I've never heard this story in that detail before.
Very, very true, man.
Wow.
And and he just, I depended on him to understand that dynamic, and he did, and it was cool. And Linda McMahon called me at the end of we got on the Ozfest tour, because that's what, when we were in that talent thing and they wanted us to go out with Chris Jericho, I was like, fuck that, we need to go on Ozfest. Because we're on the WWE. We need to pretend like we've been around for a long time and nobody knew it. Like we've got the music to back it up. I've got the band to back it up. And they made it happen. And not only did they make it happen, but the WWE actually sponsored that year's Ozfest.
I went to a couple of those shows, and the exposure that you got, that Neurotica got off that tour that summer, humongous. I mean, that definitely had to be big.
The first show, Rolling Stone magazine wrote, get there early, see Neurotica. And we were doing a cover of the Beatles song, I Am the Walrus.
That's right. I remember that. And
they were like, holy shit. And it turned out to be this great thing, because we were talking about, we could only play 4 songs. You get 20 minutes a day on the second stage at Ozfest. And the first day you start at 9 a.m. And the next day you go 9:20, 9:40, and all the way through that. And everybody on the second stage has to play early and gets to play late. We came out, we were the very first band on the very first day, and it just so happened that Rolling Stone was there.
Wow.
And we played that song, and when I was asking the guys, I was like, we should do a cover, a really good cover, and they were like, let's do a Black Sabbath song, which seems like that would be the thing to do, because you're going on with Ozzy. But I was like, but he loves the Beatles, so wouldn't it be cool if we did a Beatles song? And that song just ended up being such an amazing. So all that kind of shit was just so cool. But we did that whole tour, and we Jägermeister sponsored the tour and us, and it was just the best summer of our lives. I mean, it was 2.5 months with Ozzy. And,
wow.
I'll never forget it, man. It was incredible. And at the end of that tour, Linda McMahon called me and said, listen, we don't know what the fuck we're doing, so we're just going to give you your record back. I mean, they spent $500,000 on our band, and usually people will keep it. It's like, oh, okay, this is our record.
This is ours.
They gave it.
Yeah. Wow, that's good.
They gave it back.
They did the right thing.
Yeah, so
that doesn't happen much.
Good for them.
Yeah.
No, ever.
Wow.
That was the Neurotica story, and that's where it ended and rolled up into Velvet Revolver situation.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
So there we go, Velvet Revolver. This is a great story because, like I said, at this time, Kelly, you called me. You were telling me that, you had a chance to try out for Velvet Revolver, what happened was the rest of Guns N' Roses were forming a band and looking for a lead singer publicly. And Kelly sent me a song that was called Eye for an Eye, and I'll never forget it because I probably did something illegal playing it on the radio. I probably shouldn't have done that, because if that would have happened these days, I would have got sent a cease and desist, and because everything's this is the internet was around.
Good for you for doing that.
But
good for you for doing
I
that.
played it a bunch of times. I played it a bunch of times at WJBX in Fort Myers, but I had two conversations with Duff and Slash from Guns N' Roses, one publicly on the radio and the other one backstage at Ozfest. Brought your name up both times. Both times, Slash and Duff both said to me, I love that guy, Kelly. I really loved him. I loved his voice, loved everything about him. And I said, how close was he? He goes, as close as you can get. When Scott Weiland became available, I mean, what are you going to do? But it was his job. And they told me that twice, and they told me that one time publicly. So you really tell me the story. You go out to, how do you get into the position to try out for this band Velvet Revolver, who are, the guys from Guns N' Roses, they're, getting these big high profile guys trying out, not saying you weren't high profile, but how did you get in the mix?
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it on blabbermouth.net, which is a kind of a music news website. And I'd just gotten done with Neurotica, and I just thought, holy shit, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. And I saw that I will never forget the headline. It said, Slash says there are no real rock singers around anymore. And I thought, fuck that. I am absolutely a rock singer. So I thought to myself, I called our manager, Doug Kay. And when I called Doug Kay, Doug.
Yeah.
And I think you've met Doug on several occasions. He was like, Kelly, listen, man, he's in LA. I was like, I want to audition. I was, I want to send him the Neurotica record. Could you send it out there? And, and he was kind of like, well, no. I said, you're not going to send it. I said, okay. So Neurotica had been distributed through a label called Koch. And the publicist that was hired to do the Neurotica press, I remembered she used to be Slash's publicist. So I called her on the phone, and before I could even get out, she was like, Kelly, you'd be perfect. I'll send it to Slash. And so she sent the Neurotica record to Slash, and I'm sitting in Gilligan's on Siesta Key, and I didn't tell you that once I came back from Ozfest, I'd been in a 9-year relationship with my girl Dana, and that all fell apart right when I was going home. So I was devastated emotionally at that time.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And I was like trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my life, and Slash calls me on the phone, and I didn't get the call. I missed the call. And I go outside of Gilligan's, and you've been to that place before.
Yes.
And I listen to the message, and it's like, hey, Kelly, it's Slash. Hey, listen, me and Duff just sat and listened to this recording you did, and it's really cool. Give me a call back. I was like, I go back in, I go back into the table. I'm
Wait
like,
a second. Is this for real?
Guess who just called me, man? Guess who just fucking called me? And I'll never forget that. It was just a really cool night, and we were already like having a couple drinks, so it was fun. And so I called him up, man, and he was like, yeah, what happened to that band? And I said, yeah, so we just broke up, man. And, I kind of gave him the rundown on what happened with Neurotica. He goes, well, me and Duff listened to the whole record. He's like, we've gone through hundreds of demos and all this and blah, blah, blah. And so then I said, okay. He goes, well, I'm going to send you 3 songs and just do your thing and send it back. I said, cool. So I get a package from Saul Hudson. That was
great.
That was one of my favorite things. And I wish, like, fucking hell, I would have saved that package. But Saul Hudson, and so I get the demo, and I'm listening to it, and and he had told me that they had written 36 songs. So Slash, Duff, Matt Sorum, and Dave Kushner. Anyway, they had gotten together and played Guns N' Roses songs for the first time in a long time in L.A., and that's what spawned them to decide, let's get together and jam. So they had written these songs, but I felt like they sent me the worst songs that they wrote to kind of haze me,
right?
To see if I can shine them up.
Let's see what he can do with this. Yeah.
Eye for an Eye was one of them, and then there were 2 more. And so I sent it to them, and man, I got the call back 2 days later, and it was him and Duff. And conference call, and they were like, fuck yeah, man, we loved it, that's amazing, come to LA. And I was like, awesome. So off to LA I go, and next thing you know, it's fucking Guns and Kelly in a rehearsal room.
Wow.
It was like, blew my fucking mind. And I was just so like,
Yeah, what was going through your mind at that point in time? I mean, like you've been around the business for a while. You've been in some really cool situations. You're on Ozfest. I mean, you know all these different bands, but here you are. You're sitting in a studio with Slash and Duff from Guns N' Roses. I mean, what do you think? What do you think? Was it a blur?
So it was even weirder than that. It was even weirder because Sorum picks me up from the airport, brings me to my hotel. So Matt Sorum, I love the Cult. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a huge fan, you know, and we're riding in this Harley Davidson truck, and we're just, you know what I mean? It was super casual. It was just like any, you know, that's one of the greatest things about real rock stars is they're not fucking assholes.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're actually just the most human people that you meet in this business. It's all these younger bands coming up that think they need to be assholes. But so anyway, you know, he drops me off at the hotel, and he's like, hey man, we're having a party at the Sunset Marquee, the whiskey. And Sunset Marquee is where all the guys in the 80s, Motley Crue lived there, Rat lived there, blah, blah, blah. So I go to this party, and, well, you know, it's got the velvet rope, and you can't get in unless, you know, you're somebody. And so now I'm sitting on the deck with Matt Sorum and the guys in the Killers. And then Twiggy Ramirez comes up to me. He's friends with Matt. And he was like, hey, man, I heard you're out here, like, jamming with the guys. And I was like, holy fucking Twiggy Ramirez. Like, you know, it just felt so cool and so different from anything I was used to. So, yeah, so that whole thing went really well. And I, you know, we jammed, and it sounded great. And everything felt really, really good. And Slash brought me over and sat me on the couch, and he goes, listen, man, this is, you know, been through hundreds of stuff. There's a lot of other opinions involved in this. He goes, but I mean, you're a great singer. I need you to know that. And I was like, that's the first time I felt in my whole career like a legit singer, because he's kind of like my Joe Perry.
Right.
Yeah, it was a great experience for me. And, you know, and so then obviously what happened in the end was Duff's girlfriend, or wife at the time, was friends with Scott Weiland's wife. So they had the inside tip that he was dipping out of Stone Temple Pilots. And I don't blame them for a second. I think that was I love what they did together. You know, I'm a huge Scott Weiland fan. And so I think that, you know, all that was, it was just a great experience for me. It's the best audition that I never got, you know, best job I never.
It was confirmed by both of those guys, like I said, 2 different times, that, you know, awesome. They basically looked at me and they were like, hey, look, Scott Weiland, you know, what are you going to do? But it was absolute. And I go, well, if it wasn't for Scott Weiland, what do you think? And he goes, you know, was Kelly the man? And they looked at each other. They're like, yeah, Kelly's probably the guy. So
for 4 or 5 days, Slash put on his website that I was the guy. That's what blew my fucking mind. He had a Slash's Snake Pit at that time, and that's when Blabbermouth grabbed it and said that I was. And so it got down to me, Travis Meeks. Rolling Stone printed our pictures and they put Sebastian Bach, but Slash told me that Sebastian, he's like, no fucking way.
Yeah. Okay, so here we are. We're, you know, 2025. You're talking about the beginning of this whole conversation. We're talking about Atheist. You're 16. Here we are in 2025, and this band is
56.
A resurgence. So you're talking 40 years now, right? There's
40 years of since the band started in 35. From this is the 35th anniversary of our first record,
and a resurgence to the point where you have an announcement to make about Atheist, which is.
Yeah, we have, today it was announced we're doing our first Australian tour, starting in, I think, June 5th in Sydney, Australia. We're doing 4 shows there. And then tomorrow, by the time this comes out, it'll be today, we're announcing a Japanese tour. So, and we've got a lot of great announcements coming up. We just signed with a Massive Music and an agency in Europe exclusively. And yeah, the band is just, it's transcended sort of time. You know, these records have been around for this long, but there's a whole new young group of people, and it's mostly the people that come to our shows are in the 16 to 28, 30, you know, range. And, you know, there's still some old dogs like me that come, but I mean, mostly it's all a brand new generation of people that appreciate a kind of music that we started, you know, technical death metal, or they call it death metal, but lyrically I don't write about stupid shit, you know, so it's technical extreme metal to me. But it really started, you know, bands like even Gojira, you know, who just won a Grammy the other day. Those guys were Atheist fans. So Atheist is kind of that band that all of your favorite bands kind of grew up on.
Looking back, like you just said, you're 56 years old. You started the band when you were 16, and 35 years celebrating the band's 35th anniversary. You have to look back. Do you look back and feel really satisfied? Like, I mean, because that is something that not a lot of people can say. Maybe something they started off doing when they were younger that they're embarrassed about. This is actually kind of aged like a fine wine. And here you are 35, 40 years later, this thing is coming back to the point of tours overseas, re-releasing albums. It's got to be a very satisfying thing for you.
Yeah, we reissued our entire catalog last year on Nuclear Blast, which is a great label globally for metal, and they have Slayer and all the greats of extreme metal. And once that came out, it was just like this resurgence of people who maybe weren't able to get the records, or they lost their copies from back in the 90s or late 80s. And so the Nuclear Blast did a great job reissuing all 4 records. And then we just got, the guys in my band are like 32 and younger. So they're all younger than the music that they're playing. So the band is very fresh and young. It's not a bunch of old guys. I'm the only old guy, but
Is it hard to find people that can play that music? Because that music's incredibly difficult to play.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I got to say that it's easier now than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, to go on tour without the original guys was difficult. The level, if anybody knows, jazz music is very complex, and then extreme metal is very fast. So when you combine complexity and speed, it's dizzying, and the average rock and roll drummer can't play an Atheist song. It's very, very progressive, and so it was difficult. But these days, because of the music that we created back in 1980, 88, 89, or whatever, it came out in 89 in Europe and 90 in America. So it kind of spawned all these bands now that are super complex, and they've taken it way further than we took it. I mean, there's some between the Buried in Me and Animals as Leaders and bands like that are just really progressive. And so everybody really did a great job of learning how to play their instruments and still stay heavy. So us now, it's fun for me. I'm so grateful to have these amazing kids around me, that play their ass off, and they're great performers, and they grew up on this music. You only get to live once, and maybe you end up being you never know where you end up being in career-wise. But for me, if I die tomorrow, I've had a great time.
You did it. You made it on a lot of different levels. I mean, what if music didn't happen? You see yourself going in any other direction in life?
Well, this is Celebrity Jobber, so if I were to go back and kind of pinpoint how I ended up here through sales jobs. I was a telemarketing manager of an air conditioning company, and I had my whole band. I had all the Atheist guys working and a couple of other friends on telephones, and they would call people and say, "Hey, this is Steve Flynn from Accurate Mechanical, and we're going to be sending guys out there to clean out your air conditioning unit 1995. Get ready for the summer, make sure that everything's good, so your air conditioner's on block." And so we would book these clean-it-tunes, and I managed the whole phone room, so it was all sales. And then I had another job where I was the ice cream man. I drove around. To be specific, I was a Polar Cup man. But
I would be afraid to buy ice cream from you as a little kid. I think I would be afraid.
I drove into really scary neighborhoods, and so it was very dangerous, but it was effective because they used to waste all kinds of money on. When you roll into the hood, and they're just all about some pickled pig's feet and some sausages and a Polar Cup, and I was like, all right, I want to go in there, but I got robbed twice, but all of my jobs have been kind of sales oriented. So I think that kind of plays into being a singer in a rock band or a metal band.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
What was your very first job?
McDonald's.
Okay.
Yep, the old school McDonald's, man. I quit 10th grade, and I got a job at McDonald's, and I fucking hated it. And then I got another job at a Mexican restaurant where they had me making tortillas all day, and I hated that. And then I finally stuck. We all got a job at a place called the Original Oyster Bar that used to be in Sarasota down on the South Trail. And all of us worked there, including one of the guys from Crimson Glory, which is a well-known Florida band. So it was all musicians working there, so we had a great time in the kitchen working in those days. And those were some really magical times in the early days of Atheist and Crimson Glory before we both got signed.
Not to mention, I don't know if people know this about you, Kelly. You're also an entrepreneur. You've got a lot of entrepreneurial spirits because you owned a couple of shops when I knew you back in the day.
Yeah.
You had a couple of head shops, for lack of a better term, smoke shops.
Yeah, that was the sales thing out of the early days of telemarketing, and rolled into convincing somebody to give me a business loan to open it was a head shop. It was an old school hippies, like a Cheech and Chong were to open a smoke shop. I had bongs and glass pipes, and I had hippie clothes, and then eventually I tacked on tattoo shops. So we opened about 7 of those. The first one was called Hippies, and so we had 2 of those locations, and then we got a third location in Port Charlotte, and then I opened another place called Kiss My Ash, and that's still around. Somebody bought that from me a while ago. But yeah, that was a lot of fun, and that's when, like the SmackDown Records and WWE, when that guy came down to sign Neurotica, he just came in and saw this, the smoke shop, and I had a pretty blonde girlfriend, and he was like, "This dude's fucking we're fucking signing this band." I was just like I just was in a place in my life. It was like, it was really cool, man.
You were living the lifestyle. You had the girl, you had the smoke shop, you were living the lifestyle.
It was perfect. And I had it for a while, and then the laws changed a lot in Florida, so I got out of that business. And I also paint. I love to paint portraits and things like that. And so I try to just stay busy, artistically. But most of my jobs have all been sales oriented. That opening a smoke shop was the best idea, one of the best ideas I've ever had.
You were a local celebrity. People wanted to come in, see you, talk to you. It was really great. It was a good hang. Yeah.
Sarasota is a town full of, actually, Dickie Betts lived here, Brian Johnson, Joe Perry. But I mean, otherwise it's a very small, quaint little town where it's easy to be noticed, so to speak, I think,
sometimes the big break kind of saves the person from the ordinary job, and everybody has a story, and yours was...
The funny thing is, I had to go to telemarketing because I did try to sell door-to-door alarm systems. I went for a week's worth of training, and we had this big suitcase, and when you open it up, it had all the door alarms in it, and it had the full pitch and everything, but I had long hair. So as soon as I would people would open the door, and I'd say, "Hi, Mrs. Johnson, how are you? My name's Kelly. Do you guys have an alarm system?" And they would be like, "Boop." They'd shut the door in my face. And I thought about, like, why are they doing that? And I thought, of course, they thought I was going to rob them. They're not going to tell me whether they have a fucking alarm system.
That's hilarious.
So I was like, all right, I'm going to have to get a sales job where they can't see me. They can just hear me, then I'll be able to get past them. But if they see me, I'm done.
We've had such an in-depth conversation here, and I'm so glad that after the 30-some years that we've known each other, that we had this conversation. I learned a lot about you growing up. I learned a lot about your family, your mom, how she was the rock. I learned a lot about you and your relationship with your dad. Is there one thing that maybe that either happened in your career that we didn't talk about? Was there a moment that we skipped upon that you wanted to make sure that we got out there? Is there anything else that you feel we could have talked about?
Yeah, I love being a daddy. And my greatest achievement in life is being a daddy. Over and above all that musical shit that I love and adore, being somebody's daddy and raising, especially my little boy, and my daughter's 19 now, and
wow.
She had autism. And so those 2 kids have taught me way more about life and myself than any of these accolades and playing music and all that. So that is actually my, when I'm gone, I want to be, obviously I want my music to be remembered, but I also want to be known as a fucking legit good dad, because that's, it's a rare thing these days. A lot of guys have children, but they're not good dads, and so I want, I want that to be on my tombstone of life. So,
man, it was great having that in-depth conversation with you, getting very personal. That I'm sure.
I love you, man. You're a great friend for a long time. It's an easy conversation.
I was really glad to reconnect and get you on. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I mean, what else can be said? It's already been said. That's why I wanted to have Kelly on, because he is definitely never at a loss for words, and learned so much about him during this conversation the telemarketing, the first job at McDonald's. I mean, all that stuff I had no idea about. He is a great dad, and was glad to kind of hear about his earlier life with his father. And it seemed like it was, a little dysfunctional, which is not uncommon. I mean, and it seemed like Kelly and his dad did not see eye to eye on a lot of different things. And one of the reasons that Kelly was motivated to become who he was. And I think that when Kelly looks back, he'll be able to see more of the positive impact that his dad had on his life. Because I do feel like when we were talking that, if he had something negative to say, he would kind of come back and throw back something positive that, him and his dad shared. And the part that kind of got me emotional and teary-eyed was when he talked about going up to his hometown in Cincinnati, how his dad discovered that Kelly, because of the spelling of his last name, was actually the singer of this band on this radio station that he used to listen to in Cincinnati all the time. And when he saw Kelly perform, brought all of his friends, and the pride that he had, I really got choked up a little bit on that story. Kelly had a bunch of big breaks. I guess we could probably look at Neurotica, as he puts it, coming from underground metal with Atheist, and then being in somewhat of a mainstream kind of rock band that got played on over 80 some odd stations in the United States. Had a hit with the song Easy Speak, which was, I want to say, right around 95, 96. And the music that he created in the 80s has now come around full circle. He's 56 years old. And the music from his band Atheist, this technical death metal, as they call it, has come back and is allowing him to travel the world once again and play his music in front of thousands and thousands of people. That is success right there, man. Kind of when I first met Kelly, and I was very impressed by him. As a young guy first getting into the radio and music business, he was the first quote-unquote rock star that I ever met. And he was very nice to me, and I became a huge fan of their band Neurotica, and 30 years later, still friends today. I remember one time me and Kelly and his girlfriend at the time and this guy, Hippie Jim, who was kind of like a hanger-on of the band, but, a little bit older and ran some errands, maybe hanging around to get some leftover chicks or whatever. But I remember us having a weekend where we drove to West Palm Beach and we stayed in a hotel and we saw Ozfest, and it was a great show. And I remember being in the car and listening to Faith No More and their song Last Cup of Sorrow, just thinking about this moment for the first time in I don't know how many years, just really proud of Kelly Shaefer and who he's become as a musician, as a father. Really a great guy. Let alone the stuff we talked about, touring on Ozfest, signed by the WWE. If not for Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, Kelly would have been the lead singer of the band Velvet Revolver. That's a fact. Duff McKagan and Slash both told me that to my face. So listen, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. Even I didn't know all this stuff about my friend Kelly Shaefer from Neurotica and Atheist. So I actually learned a lot today. Please subscribe. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Would love a 5-star rating. Leave a review. Past guests and episodes up on celebrityjobber.com. Follow on Instagram, celebrity_jobber_podcast, and youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. Can't see him wearing a suit and a tie, but if not for Atheist and Neurotica, I'd say Kelly Shaefer, probably in the sales field. Thank you so much again for checking out another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. Until next week, see you then. I'm Jeff Zito.